We're starting class number 2 in the series called The 3 Weeks, 9 Days in Tisha B'Av. So just as an introduction, first to the idea of why we're discussing what we are, and then we're going to discuss the 9 days. So last time we discussed the 3 weeks. Basically the idea is as follows. Judaism has a very peculiar or perhaps unique view of time, much different than the rest of the world does. The rest of the world in general looks at time much like a timeline. Wherever you are on that line, what has happened is behind you, has no effect on you anymore. What will happen has not happened and has no effect on you, and what has happened has no effect on the future, because you're just moving along a timeline. And that's pretty much how the world looks at it. You can see that by how they celebrate holidays. They celebrate the 1st of July, the 4th of July, or the 14th of July, depending what country you're in, as Independence Days for different purposes. But none of them say that we are reliving the Day of Independence. They say we're remembering. It's a memorial. We remember the day that we were freed from the rule of the king in France, or we were freed from the British, or we were freed from the British, depending what country, I suppose. So they're doing is they're remembering it, and that's the significance. In Judaism, we look at time like a spiral. You say it's like a circle, but there's circle upon circle upon circle. Every year it'd sort of be one circle on top of the other, like a bunch of records, of LPs stacked on top of each other. They all turn around together, but each one is higher than the next, and that's like each year. And we look at each year, and every day of the year, and every moment within every day, as having an effect on the future years in that exact same moment. So, for instance, if something spectacular happens at a specific moment, that will have a spiritual effect. It will actually put a spiritual force into the air that every year, at that moment, that same thing will happen. So we see a number of these things in the Torah. Virtually all of our holidays are celebrations of this concept, but we follow it through in many ways. We often think of it and we don't even realize it, like the idea of an anniversary. You celebrate an anniversary, you're not really, in our minds, we're not really celebrating the remembrance of the day we were married as much as a renewal of our marriage. Like it's like a special day where we feel something new is coming out of it. That's coming from our belief system. The West would not think that there's any substance to such an idea, because they say it happened. We'll remember the day because it's an important day, but that's all. So if you look, for instance, at the holiday of Pesach, so the holiday of Pesach is celebrated as it is because on that day, on the 15th of Nisan, 3,300 years ago, the Jewish people were freed by God suspending the laws of nature and doing everything he did to bring the Jews out of Egypt. Because he did that on that time, on that same day, at that same moment, throughout history, there will be a force of freedom put into the air, which you can latch onto. And you latch onto it by feeling the feeling of the holiday. You can latch onto it by allowing it to affect your ability to become free from whatever it is that's binding you. Every holiday has the same idea. Rosh Hashanah is probably one of the most obvious. Rosh Hashanah being the first day of the year is the day that everything was created. Actually, it's the day that human beings were created. The 6th day of creation is Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, just like when you have a job, so you work at your job, and every year on the anniversary of your being hired, you have a review to see how you did this past year and to see if they're going to keep you for the next year. We have the same thing on Rosh Hashanah, since the world was created that day, and the significance of the world being created is that human beings were created that day. So therefore, as a human being, we have a review by God. How were we that year? And there'll be a commitment as to how things will be in the coming year, based on our actions and what we do, especially at that time. And therefore, every year that happens Rosh Hashanah. But it even goes further than that. For instance, if you look at the Jews in the story after they left Egypt and they're in the desert, and many things that happen to the Jews in the desert will have enormous effect on us forever. So the best example is that on the holiday of Shavuos, Moshe went up on the mountain in order to receive the Torah. Right? That's when he went up. So 40 days later he comes down and he sees the Jews worshiping the golden calf. Now we all know what that is, right, that story. So if you would take 40 days from the holiday of Shavuos, you will get to the 17th day of Tammuz. 17th day of Tammuz signifies the beginning of what we call the 3 weeks that we discussed last class. And that tells us on that day a number of very horrible things happened to the Jewish people. Why? Because the spiritual force of destruction was placed in the air when the Jews worshipped the golden calf on that day, so that every year from then on, there will be a negative force. That is, if Hashem is going to punish the Jews, this is a time that it's going to happen. It doesn't make Hashem punish us if we don't deserve it, but it's sort of like, it just makes it so that if it's a hung jury, so to speak, Hashem is going to be a little harsher than he might be at other times. So we have in history a number of things that happened, we spoke about last week, that all happened on the 17th day of Tammuz. If you go through the desert further, after Moshe breaks the Ten Commandments on the 17th day of Tammuz, and the Jews go through, then we have the story of the spies. The spies are sent into Israel in order to see, it's time for the Jews to go there. How is it going to go? Are we going to get into Israel? Are we not going to get in? And they were having questions, or some of them were having questions about Hashem sending the Jewish people into the desert to go to Israel when they were afraid that perhaps he wasn't going to let them get into Israel. And so they sent spies to see what are they up against, what kind of army is there in Israel, what kind of a country is it. And they sent in, and the spies came back, and for the most part, although not in consensus, but in the most part, the spies came back with horrible stories. Yeah, very negative, frightening stories. And the Jews were led to believe that if they would go into the land of Israel, they would be killed. And they questioned God, why did you get us out of Egypt? So we should die in the desert? Right? Why are you doing this to us? And God says, in the Medrash, it says that God said that as you cry on this day, you will cry in the future on this day. You cry on this day for no purpose. In the future, you will cry on this day for a purpose. That day that the spies came back and the Jews cried was the 9th day of Av, which is 3 weeks after the 17th day of Tammuz. The 9th day of Av, through history, has had many things happen as God said it would, including the destruction of the first temple and the destruction of the second temple, right? Both of which are enormous events for us, and many other things throughout history, including the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition. They say that the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, and that day there was many events in the Middle Ages that began on that day, and numerous things that happened on the 9th day of Av, which were horrible calamities. Now again, not because that Hashem will punish the Jewish people if we don't deserve it on that day. That's not the case at all. But if we're in a point where Hashem might punish us, that would be when he does. So the period starting with the 17th day of Tammuz and culminating with the 9th day of Av is considered the 3 weeks of national mourning, when the Jews mourn for the loss of the Jewish Commonwealth, the loss of the temple, the loss of the innocence that they lost with the worshipping of the golden calf, which really changed history and made these days very eventful days. So how it works basically is that when the 3 weeks begin, which is I believe on July 9th this year, the first period has some forms of mourning because we mourn over what happened, but it's not severe. It's actually quite light in comparison to others, but it increases. As we enter the month of Av, the Talmud teaches us, and the Shulchan Aruch repeats it, that Misha Nichnas Av, the one who enters into the month of Av, Mamatim B'Simcha, you lessen happiness, because it's a sad time. It's the opposite statement that we hear in the month of Adar, where the Halacha in the Gemara says, Misha Nichnas Adar, he who enters into the month of Adar, Marbim B'Simcha, we increase our happiness. At this time we decrease it. So the first day of the month of Av is what we call the first day of the 9 days, since the Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of Av. So those 9 days signify an increase over the level of the mourning, to a level that is beyond any other form of mourning that we ever do. Now when one mourns for a parent or for a loved one, it's very similar in some ways to what we're doing now, but it goes even further. So for instance, we're going to now talk about the 9 days, which begins 9 days before Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av this year I believe is on the 31st of July, so 9 days before that, inclusive of all of those days. We follow very, very strict and very specific laws which mandate a high level of mourning, a level of sadness that we're really not supposed to contradict. And we're supposed to do things in our lives that will help us feel the anguish and the pain of the loss of these items. And it's understood. It was 2,000 years ago when we lost the temple, and early, of course, about 100 years before that when we lost the first temple. It's a long time ago. And for most of us, we can't comprehend what it is that we lost. We really can't. We don't. The feeling when people cry in Tisha B'Av, it always used to make me wonder how that could be real. How could a person today feel the loss of the temple of so many thousands of years ago? We don't know what we lost. We have no idea what it was. Now, how can you feel that pain? So what we do during this period of time, starting with the 3 weeks and culminating and building up until we get to Tisha B'Av, is to assist us in doing things which will influence our emotions. See, we don't believe that when God legislates emotions, when God tells us you have to feel something, you have to love God, you have to fear your parents, right? You have to respect your parents. These are all based on emotion. He doesn't expect that you simply can force yourself to have an emotion. So Jewish law causes us to do certain things that will assist us in acquiring the emotions that we need to have to celebrate anything in the Jewish life in the correct way. So, for instance, it says that on Yom Tov you should have meat and wine at your meals, meaning you should have food that you would normally eat when you're happy. If you wanted to celebrate, you've got a new job. You want to celebrate a new job, you go out for a steak dinner. You don't go out for a pizza. Right? The idea that you celebrate with a fancy meal. So on Yom Tov, on Jewish holidays, we have a fancy meal. And part of the reasoning is because by having the meal and enjoying the meal, it will cause us to enjoy the holiday. It really should be the other way around, that the holiday's joy causes us to eat the meal, but we understand that that's difficult. So this period of time, we get into a very intense and very important period, beginning with the 3 weeks, which, as I said, starts on the 9th of July this year. But then we get to the 9 days. Well, since we talked about the laws of the 3 weeks previously, and I'm be glad to answer questions about it as we go on, but we should talk about the second stage, which is the 9 days. And these 9 days, again, beginning on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Av, the first day of the month of Av, culminate at the end of Tisha B'Av. And they add to us a number of new restrictions. So if we want to follow our outline, which is not in any listing of importance, it's just what came to my mind as I was reviewing the laws. So when we get to the section that says building, painting, and home repairs. So during the 9 days, we're not supposed to build what they call a binyan shel simcha. That is a building or a part of the building that is being built for happy purposes. So for instance, if you have a child who's getting married and you wanted to build for them a home on your land, if you were a very wealthy person with a whole bunch of land, you couldn't do that at that time because you were doing it in order for simcha, for their wedding. If you were building a cottage, right, which is a vacation home, you wouldn't do that during the 9 days because at that period is a time where we don't do things that cause us happiness. The same thing is with home repairs, extensive home repairs. We try to stay away from doing those during the 9 days, especially things that cause the house to look nicer. For instance, if you're having a leak in your roof, we will discuss that separately. That's a little bit different. But if you're talking about trying to make your home more of a home that is to your liking, more, it's prettier, it looks refreshed and clean. So while of course you can keep your house clean at all times, during the 9 days we would not do things like painting to refresh your home in such a way. We wouldn't put up borders, we wouldn't put up wallpaper, we wouldn't hire someone to come in and upgrade our bookshelves or fix something like that, which is done almost entirely for purposes of aesthetics, to make our homes nicer. Those cause us to be happy, right? We all love being able to walk into a room and we see that everything is working, everything is fine. We have a sort of a happy feeling over that. And when one piece isn't right, then it's like nothing is right. So if we're in a situation where one piece isn't right, during the 9 days we don't fix it, in order so that we don't feel that happiness that we might feel otherwise. That does not mean that if you have a problem with your house that you can't fix that. If you need a plumber, if you need an electrician, if you have a need for these things, if something breaks, you're allowed to fix those. We're talking about fixing something or doing something for the sake of simcha, which is aesthetics, or to celebrate an event. Those are cases where we would say that you can't do it. But if you have a leak in your roof, you can put in a new roof. Yes.
I'm guessing for gardening you would water the grass, but you wouldn't plant.
That's right. You would not plant new plants and flowers during that 9 days, but you'd water it, you'd maintain it, you wouldn't want to hurt it in any way. Okay. Now there are other exceptions, but primarily it's the guarding of what you have you're allowed to do to keep the upkeep. But the additional stuff for that period, one should stay away from it. It's only 9 days. Now the question that comes up every year with a number of people is, what if I forget? And since this is the time of year, and around here summer does not last that long, and people all want to get work done and they forget about this period, and suddenly they realize that they booked someone to come and paint their house, or they booked someone to come and put on a roof, And what do? You already did it. So if it's possible to ask the people who are doing it to wait and to go after the 9 days, you have to do that. If it's possible to ask them, even if there's a small surcharge, then you're required to ask them. If you go and you ask them and they can't do it, because you have a contract with them, you have to fulfill your side of the contract, and they have other jobs, and they simply can't move things around last minute because you forgot about your religious obligations. So in that case, you're allowed to let them do it. So if you forgot, you are allowed. So if you are allowed, number one, the serious reason of there's a need, there's something broken, something leaking, you can fix. Number two, if you forgot, literally forgot. If you didn't, or you're pretending to have forgotten, you're really not allowed to do it, right? And you can't do it yourself either, right? Like painting and so forth like that. We don't do that at this time of year. You can cut your grass, you can do things that would maintain your lawn and maintain your house, but you can't go beyond that. So that is a whole section that deals with our homes and anything within our homes. So if you would come to me and tell me that you broke your dishes somehow, you dropped all your dishes when you were carrying them out to another room, you'd be allowed to buy more. If you told me you broke one and now your set's not finished and you want to buy one to make a set, you wouldn't be allowed to do that for 9 days. Because the difference between the two is, one is you need dishes to eat on, number two is you don't need beautiful dishes that match during the 9 days. So at that time, the fact that you're missing one will add to the pain of the time that we're in. Okay, the next section that is really pretty unique to this time of year is the section that deals with foods that we're allowed to eat and not allowed to eat. The example I gave, that on Yom Tov we eat meat and wine because meat and wine assists us in being happy. And by the way, you don't have to eat meat and wine on Yom Tov. It's an example of what makes people happy when they have a special meal. But if for some reason you thought peanut butter was the object that you would have that makes you very happy and that would be an important meal that you'd invite guests for, so as corrupted as you may be in your taste, that would be allowed. But during the 9 days, because the average person considers meat and wine to be what you serve important people and its important occasions, so therefore we do not eat meat or wine during the 9 days. So we would have fish, we could have vegetables, but you can't have meat or wine. If you cook something parve with meat, like let's say with a meat ingredient, you cannot eat that during the 9 days. However, if you cook something parve, like fish, in a meat pot, that you can eat that because you're not eating meat. Right? You can't eat meat, you can't eat chicken, but if you use the meat pot because, let's say, you're used to cooking fish in a meat pot and you don't have a milk pot that you could cook this fish in, for whatever reason, you'd be allowed to use your meat pot, but you could not serve it if there was meat in it, right? If you actually added meat, or you made it for let's say Shabbos dinner right before, and it has some meat in it, even though it's not a meat dish, that you could not serve. But if you served it on Shabbos, and it was parve, and you kept it in a place where it remained parve, you'd be allowed to use that even though the pots were meat pots. So that you'd be allowed to do.
Can a child eat meat?
If a little child is allowed to, an older child if there's a medical reason or a specific need. But if they're old enough to understand the idea of mourning, to mourn, then we should try to get them not to. But if it's a difficulty, then either as a specific situation we would have to discuss privately, or if you have a medical reason, then they definitely can. Okay? It's the same thing applies to nursing and pregnant mothers. Nursing and pregnant mothers, if they have a belief from their doctor that they need to eat something that they would not normally be able to eat, like meat, for whatever reason, if the doctors would say you need to eat chicken or meat in order to have more protein in your blood or in your milk, in order to go or to the energy that you need, under that circumstance they're allowed to. But they should eat chicken rather than beef, because as we know from the Talmud, that originally in the Torah chicken was not meat. The rabbis very early on made it that chicken, since it seems so much like meat in its consistency and how you feel when you eat it, so they've considered it meat, and we don't eat it during the 9 days. But if there'd be a necessity, if you had to eat meat for a medical purpose, if you could eat chicken, that's preferable over eating meat. But one should try not to. If you have a special occasion, like a siyum or a bris, these are really the only two type of occasions that you might celebrate during the week. In those occasions, then one is allowed to serve meat for those who participate. Though it is not uncommon that people make a siyum. A siyum is the completion of a book of Talmud, primarily. There are some other books that might constitute it, but in general, somebody studies a book of Talmud, and at the end of that, they make a party, a small party, celebrating the fact that they have went through this Talmud one time and completed learning it on one occasion, and while they will go back and learn it again, the completion is worthy of a celebration. And therefore, if somebody does learn Torah and finish their book during the 9 days, you can have a party, you can invite whomever you'd like at the party, although it is suggested not to have too large a party, and everyone who is present for the siyum may eat meat during the 9 days. Period. They're allowed. They can have a regular meat meal. At a bris, the same applies. There's the same similar laws. There's the same mitzvah. You're doing it for the sake of a mitzvah, and then one will be allowed to do that. But otherwise, during weekdays, we do not eat meat or chicken, anything similar to that. We would, of course, we could have fish, we could have vegetable, we could have parv, we can have tofu, all these types of things. But anything that is from an animal other than fish, we would not eat during the 9 days, except on Shabbos. On Shabbos and the examples I gave you, you are allowed. On Shabbos, we do not mourn on Shabbos. Therefore, you're allowed to eat normally. You can have meat, and you can have chicken, and you can have wine on Shabbos. Where Shabbos would present one problem is at Havdalah, because while you're allowed to drink wine on Shabbos, by virtue of the fact of the ritual of Havdalah, you are now saying Shabbos is over. That's what you're saying, and therefore you should not drink wine at Havdalah. So there's a number of points. If you make Havdalah at home, and you have a child who is approximately 8 years old, 6, 8, 10 years old, they're not really fully cognizant of mourning to the full extent, but they are old enough to have some understanding of a blessing. So then the custom would be to make Havdalah with wine and to give it to that child to drink. Remember, there only has to be 3.2 ounces, so it's not a lot of wine. But you could give it, or grape juice, you could give to the child. We can't drink grape juice, just like we can't drink wine during the 9 days. So, except for Kiddush on Shabbos, we wouldn't do it. At Havdalah, we can't. There is another custom that people have, they make Havdalah on beer. The reason that they do that is that the law says that on any occasion when you do not have access to wine for Havdalah, and frankly for other ritual purposes as well, you're allowed to use what's called Khamar Medina, which means a local beverage that is considered important, that you would give to an important guest if they came to your home. So included in that would be beer, would be Coke, for instance, those types of soft drinks would be included, that if you did not have a child who could drink the wine, so there's an argument as to what to do. Some say you can drink the wine, and some say that you should use something other than wine, like beer or so forth. It's all based on the custom of the individual. If you don't have a custom, it would be preferable to drink the wine. It would be if you don't have a custom. Because we have an argument now of customs. You have one that says you're supposed to use wine for Havdalah if you have wine. That's a general rule all year. The other one is you can't drink wine during the 9 days. So you have now a conflict. In order to fulfill one mitzvah, you have to break another. So there's ways around it. As I said, you let a child do it. Right? You make Havdalah, but the child drinks it, or you can use another drink. So if you usually use wine or grape juice for Havdalah every week, then it's preferable that you would drink the wine or grape juice if you had no one else to do it. Yes?
If we use soft drinks, do we still say Baruch Hu?
No. You would say the appropriate blessing on the drink. Okay, so those are really the only times when you would be able to drink wine or eat meat during the 9-day period, except for medical needs, that the doctor would tell you you needed it for some reason. Of course, you'd be allowed for either of those things. Otherwise, we don't.
How about dairy? Because dairy is considered for celebration and stuff like that.
Not really. Jewish tradition says that if you're going to have an important meal, you're going to serve meat.
Okay.
So you're allowed to have dairy. Okay, now another area that is significant, and it is very different than we do all year, is the idea of our clothing. During the 3 weeks, we spoke about some restrictions on purchasing clothing, that you should not purchase clothing during the 3 weeks that require a Shechianu blessing. That is an important piece of clothing that would make you would feel happy to wear. right, to exclude underwear, socks, shoes, and those types of things, which we would not make a shechianu on. However, during the 9 days, we're much stricter. We do not purchase clothing during the 9 days at all. We don't take our clothing to the dry cleaner during the 9 days, even if we don't pick it up till after the 9 days. We don't pick it up during the 9 days, even though we dropped it off and it was finished before the 9 days. And we don't wear any freshly laundered clothing during the 9 days. So what does that mean? It means that we're not supposed to wear clothing that has been washed and pressed and has not been used at all since it was washed and pressed during the 9-day period, except for Shabbos. So let's say the first day of the 9 days falls on a Tuesday. So then what you should have done is that any clothing that you have in your home that you are going to wear during the 9 days other than Shabbos, you should either have worn it and then just hung it back up, or you just, what is done in order to make it possible is that you go into your closet and you just try it on. When you try it on, then that's considered sufficient to be considered not newly laundered. And then you can put it back into your closet. So we take our clothing out and we do that and we put it back in. And that fulfills that custom, so that you could wear clothing that could have come from the dry cleaner before the 9 days, that was in your closet. Like I'll have a white shirt in my closet. I shouldn't take a new white shirt unless before the 90s began, I went and I took my 4 or 5 of my white shirts and put them on and then took them off and hung them back up. That way it's not considered freshly new, laundered, and ironed. So because of course we all know that when we wear clothing like that, it makes us happy. So it wants to diminish that a little bit. On the other hand, it is forbidden to dress or look unsophisticated, disheveled, dirty, or have an odor. Those are all forbidden. And so therefore one has to find an ability to do this without dressing dirty and wearing old clothes and so forth. You would take your regular clothes and simply put them on for a moment and take it off, and then you could do that. If you run out of clothes, you only did it to 5 outfits and you need 6 before you can have more. So there are 2 things that can be done. One is, if necessary and you've run out of clothes, you are allowed to take an outfit that you did not prepare, was not prepared to be used during the 9 days, and you can use that. But you can't keep taking more new ones, because after you've taken that one new one, that one you should keep. And you should use that and whatever else you can. Because remember, when you think about 9 days, it's not really all that terribly long. Because Shabbos puts an interruption in it. What happens on Shabbos, since there's no mourning on Shabbos you can wear your regular clothing. Right? Unless Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbos itself, which happens rather often, but not this year, unless that happens, you are allowed to wear freshly laundered clothing on Shabbos. And what you do is, if you've run out of clothing or you're close to it, you are allowed to change your outfit a number of times on Shabbos in order so that your clothing will be prepared for the rest of the week. But what you can't do is simply put it on and off on Shabbos, because that's forbidden on Shabbos, because you're preparing from Shabbos for the weekday. But if normally you might not wear 3 outfits on Shabbos, maybe you'd wear one thing on Friday night and something else Shabbos day, but in the afternoon you wouldn't change, it is not unheard of that you could, so therefore you'd be allowed to do that. And as long as you wore it for a short while, then that would be fine, and you'd have now an extra outfit, or 2 extra outfits, theoretically, that you can now wear when the rest of the 9 days are on. So it's not horrible. I mean, it does make things difficult. What makes it a bit harder, well, let's go through this and then we'll get to the harder part, which is, what about objects other than clothes? Bed linens, towels, and so forth. So really, bed linens, one should not change their bed linens during that period. If you need to, it should be changed to bed linens that also are not freshly washed and ironed, that somehow you laid on them, you sat on them, you had them out before the 9 days so that they would be ready. You don't have to actually make your bed and lay on it, but you can just put them out the same way you might with the clothes. And then I already spoke about Shabbos clothes. Children's clothes, so young children who dirty their clothes often, you can wash them as much as you need. Right? Little children, if they come home and no matter what you do, they're going to get dirty. You don't have enough clothes for them for 9 days. You're allowed to wash their clothes as much as is needed. You can wash diapers, you can wash their clothing, anything that you need for young children who would get dirty. And so they could be washed and have more clothes. If you don't need to, of course, we wouldn't. But it's pretty much expected that way children are, you're going to need to. So you'd be perfectly allowed, no problem at all, to actually wash and dry their clothes and during the 9 days. And not just you could wear not dirty clothes, but you could actually wash them for the children. Now the next section is about bathing and swimming. And this is also a bit of a difficult area. Similar to when one sits Shiva, we don't bathe at that period, and we don't bathe. Swimming is a part of bathing in this case. We don't bathe. That is to say that during the time of a Shiva, when a person is sitting Shiva, they can wash themselves so that they're not dirty, and they can wash themselves that they don't have an odor. But they can't do it by taking a warm shower. That's during a Shiva, when a person, God forbid, loses a family member. But they can't do that for that 1 week. So they can go into the washroom and take a washcloth and wash under their arms, and they can wash one limited time. And they can go into a cold shower one limited time, not in a normal manner that you might do it, even during a Shiva, in order for a person, so they shouldn't have an odor, or they shouldn't feel uncomfortable, or actually be dirty. I mean, there are ways that we would actually physically get dirty. So that's allowed. During the 9 days, it's the same thing. The point is, when it comes to how a person is able to bathe or not bathe during the 9 days, it really boils down to pleasure. We shower with warm water regularly, and we do it for pleasure, right? In other words, we do it to wash up and to be clean. But part of it, and those of us who shower early in the morning, part of it is to help us wake up. Part of it is because it feels good. Part of it is because we want to be clean. We could be clean without using very nice warm water. So therefore, since we are used to taking showers every day, so the halakha allows us during the 9 days to take a shower, but we have to use at most lukewarm water, not hot water like you'd normally use. Preferably cold water if you're going to take a shower all at one time, unless you're dirty. If you literally are dirty, you are working outside, you're a manual laborer, you're cleaning a child, you do something that actually physically gets you dirty. So you're allowed to wash in order to be clean, and that's even with hot water. But what they're trying to keep you away from is bathing for pleasure. And so hot showers, right, anyone who stays in a shower for 20 minutes is bathing for pleasure. Right? After the first 3-4 minutes, you pretty much can wash yourself. So therefore, we don't take hot showers during that period. That whole time, right up, including getting ready for Shabbos, we don't take a hot shower. We can take a lukewarm shower in order to clean ourselves. We have to be careful. The 9 days is not a time where we're allowed to be dirty, or we're allowed to be unpresentable or have an odor. We have to be dignified. We're made in the image of God, and we have to emulate that by always being dignified. However, the difference between dressing in a manner that is appropriate and dressing in a manner that makes you happy is all the difference in the 9 days. That's the difference in the two. So if you prepare yourself in advance and you have enough clothes and you do it correctly, then you'll have no problem, right, as far as the clothing. When it comes to the bathing, it's difficult to take a lukewarm shower. It's difficult to wash with cold water, but it's only boils down to 1 week. And we learn to do it. And we deal with it because we're supposed to feel the pain of the destruction of the temples. And the idea is, like, how could I expect that I'm going to be able to have a hot shower and act in the way that I want and enjoy everything when Judaism is destroyed? Right? We do not have a Jewish home. We do not have the Commonwealth. We do not have our own governing. And therefore we feel that loss. So that's tied into this whole idea of bathing. So you are allowed to bathe a child as is needed at any time that's necessary in order to clean them. A child who's old enough to mourn, to understand mourning, even if they aren't mourning because they're not 13 or 12, but they understand it, they should also be taught not to shower normally this week, but they can wash and shower as needed if they get dirty. And there's a better chance that a 12-year-old boy is going to get dirty than any one of us. So that could be quite common for anything. We do not get haircuts during this period, and we do not shave. Women also would not get haircuts, and they would not shave during the 9 days other than a woman who is looking to get married, like of marriageable age, or a woman who has been married for up to a year. Either of those women are allowed to shave their legs and to do certain things to beautify themselves because they are being either evaluated by outsiders who are looking at her and how she looks, even though we understand that it's the 9 days. And a woman in her first year of marriage is still things are still shaky a little because it's still new, even if it's going very well. And therefore she has the privilege to be able to do things that others don't in order to beautify herself for her husband. And that's a part of the arrangement, yeah.
Can a woman wear makeup?
Yes.
Can you also just go back about the dry cleaners?
Sure. So the law of dry cleaning is certainly if you pick up something from the dry cleaner, you can't use it because you didn't prepare it, correct? Mm-hmm. All right, unless it was for Shabbos, but you shouldn't. But we're not supposed to use cleaners at this period. So you're not supposed to go during the 9 days to the cleaner to drop anything off, even if he tells you it won't be ready till afterwards. You are not supposed to go and pick something up that you dropped off before, unless there's a necessity. Right? Like it's you have one Shabbos suit, like a lot of yeshiva guys have one Shabbos suit, and they forgot to pick it up. They just, they're flighty. They forgot to go and pick it up before the 9 days, so they would be allowed to do it, to pick it up. But under normal circumstances, we would not. So we can't use them. The same thing with if you go to a laundry, right, or doing your own laundry. It's the same. Yes.
How about washing of hair?
So,
or like styling of hair? Or
so if you do it in cold water, you're allowed to do so, or in lukewarm water.
And shaitels and stuff, or also?
They should not get their shaitels done during the 9 days. During the 3 weeks they can, but at that period you should no longer do it. Okay. And you shouldn't buy a new shaitel either at that point.
And underwear also have to be...
No, underwear, socks, anything that's used for absorption of odor or of sweat, right? That it's a part of why we wear them. So they do not have to be previously used. So you can just take them right out of your drawer, like the regular time. However you normally do it, you can do it then. But you should not purchase new ones. During the 3 weeks, you can purchase them, but during the 9 days, we shouldn't. The only time that you're allowed to purchase clothing or objects for your home is if you would take a significant loss if you didn't do it. And this is, not everyone does this, but the halacha allows it. So if there's an occasion that there's an enormous sale once a year, let's say from somebody that you purchase things from, let's say you buy fine china from a certain place, and once a year they have a big sale. And it happens to be that this year it falls out during the 9 days. So as long as it's not during the week that Tisha B'Av actually falls, in other words, let's say Tisha B'Av falls on a Tuesday, so 9 days would encompass quite a bit before then. But from Saturday on, you shouldn't buy anything. It's a little bit more severe. But before then, even during the 9 days, if you would take a significant loss by not buying the dishes, you'd be allowed to at that time.
How about deodorants and like perfumes and such?
Well, you can wear them. That's for sure. You can wear them.
If you haven't been bathing for,
right,
maybe weird or something.
Well, you're allowed to be clean. Remember, you're just not allowed to bathe in hot water.
Okay.
So you are allowed to be clean, and you're allowed to do deodorants and makeup and perfumes. Now you can put talcum powder in your hair. That sometimes is helpful for people who have their hair gets a little greasy. Those types of things. So you're not supposed to allow yourself to be disheveled or smell or be dirty. You're not supposed to do. So we have all of these various types of restrictions like that. Let's go through a few others and some exclusions. So one major exclusion is that you're not, as I said, you're not supposed to buy things. During the 3 weeks, you don't buy anything that you would make a shechianu on. During the 9 days, we're not supposed to buy anything at all. That is, anything other than a necessity. Like you can buy food. During the 9 days, you can buy food on Erev Tisha B'Av. You're allowed to buy food on Tisha B'Av for after Tisha B'Av, right, for that night, even though it's preferable you don't. We'll talk about that next week. But during the 9 days, you can go grocery shopping, for instance. That's fine. But when it comes to other objects, right, that are not a necessity, so only if you would take a significant loss. So Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. He has a response. Somebody asked him about buying a car during the 9 days. And he says that one should not buy a car during the 9 days unless by their not buying it, they would take a significant loss. Right? Because since a car has always been a large ticket item, and for, let's say, for some reason, the car dealerships during the 9 days say we're going to lower the prices by $2,000 and it's going to go for 2 days. So in that case, you'd be allowed to do it because it's a significant amount of money. Now, in general, during the 9 days, we consider these to be dangerous times, difficult times, and therefore swimming is included in bathing. Swimming is not included because simply it's dangerous, because it's not really dangerous since it's pretty normal that people swim, but swimming is really included because it's a form of bathing. So therefore we don't go swimming during the 9 days. So if you would go on a vacation, it's not the best week to go because you can't use the water. You can't go into the pool, or you can't use the lake. It's a time that people who rent cottages don't rent that week for that reason, because you can't use the water. So we don't swim at that time. But other things that have an integral danger within them that are optional, we stay away from. So for instance, if you're suing someone or being sued, it's preferable to not have the court case during the 9 days. It's preferable not during the 3 weeks, but the 9 days is actually written that one should try not to have a court case during the 9 days. You should try not to have a medical procedure that is not necessary to have it then. Like if the doctor comes to you and says, I know you need X, and we've been talking about it, well, I finally got you an appointment, it's going to be this day, during the 9 days, you can take it. But if the doctor says, I know that you wanted this, you to remove this mole, and there's nothing wrong with the mole, you just don't like how it looks, like it's a optional surgery, so then you should not do it during the 9 days. The idea being it's a dangerous time, and if something bad is going to happen, that's when it'll happen. So not that, if you don't do it, you're going to live forever, but it's just a time that we're careful. So we limit business to try to stay away from doing these types of things that are unnecessary in business. We limit court cases. We limit medical procedures. I had a friend who had an injury, and he didn't know exactly what it was, and he wanted to wait till after the 9 days for the diagnostic tests. And he clearly wasn't dying, but it was a serious issue. So I don't necessarily, if he had asked me if I would have told him that he should wait, but he chose to wait, and he did. And that's the feeling people have. You don't want to do those things. I remember one time that one of my kids' schools, they had a camp. My kids who are older now were younger, and the school wanted to take them on a boat ride. And the parents got very upset because during the 9 days is not really the time to go on a boat, because it's a bit more dangerous than walking to school, right? Than walking or playing in a park. So they protested because there's this feeling. It's not necessarily always a rational feeling. You don't have to expect that something bad will happen, but we have a feeling that if something bad would happen, it's now. So we limit those certain things. Again, it brings the consciousness to you. So you're thinking about this time of year, and it causes you to have those feelings. So we limit those types of things as well. Now, in addition to this, so we're basically dealing with very serious changes in our life, right? But let's go some pragmatic areas. If you're in business or you need to go out to eat during the 9 days, many kosher restaurants are open. Many kosher restaurants are open and will serve meat, because they're not always their feeling is that they're going to serve kosher meat to someone who's not observant. Better they would do that than the person would eat unkosher meat, because all the restaurants are closed. So it's a bit of a rationale, and it's a bit of a rationalization. But the bottom line is that it does make sense. But when it comes to us, and you're invited out to eat, or you need to go out to eat for business, and it's during the 9 days, you can eat in a meat restaurant, as I mentioned. You just can't eat foods that are prepared directly with meat. So any of the kosher restaurants here know this, and we'll have special 9 days menus, which will be in addition to the regular menu. So they'll have more fish and more vegetarian foods or tofu foods in meat restaurants. Of course, in non-meat restaurants, then it doesn't make a difference. You can eat whatever you'd like. It won't affect it in any way. But in meat restaurants, you have that problem, and you certainly wouldn't go out and drink wine at all in any case during the 9 days, because that's simply for joy. But if you needed to go out to eat, you would be able to eat in a meat restaurant and just have fish, because even though it was prepared in meat, with meat utensils, that's not considered meat in the idea of happiness, of joy. It might be meat. You might have to wait 6 hours before you could have milk, but you would be allowed to eat it at this time. Another issue is with the siyums. The idea of making a siyum, or a completion of a Talmud, and then having a party has been seriously abused over the past generation, in that you'll have restaurants in New York that will hire boys who learn Torah to finish a tractate, finish a book of Talmud during the 9 days, one every single day during the 9 days, so that people can come to the restaurant. They don't know who the boy is. He'll get up and do his siyum, and then they can all eat meat. The letter of the law, it's allowed, but it's certainly bypassing the spirit of the law, because the idea is when someone finishes the book of the Torah, he's happy, and since it's a mitzvah, for a mitzvah you're allowed to eat meat. So just like for a bris, so he's performing the mitzvah, he can do it. But you're supposed to also feel some joy in the fact that he did this, and if you don't know him, you really don't feel the joy. You're just copping out and having meat. So one really should be strict and not do that when it comes for such a thing. But if you know the person and they invite you to a siyum, it's perfectly acceptable to go and to have meat. It's the same thing if you're invited to a bris. Really, the letter of the law would be, the tradition is that people have meat meals at a bris. We don't do that. You'll notice we always have dairy. That even though a bris was in the morning, customarily people used to have meat meals, so that because they were celebrating a mitzvah. Now, speaking about mitzvahs, so rather than going into detail, if it's a necessity and you want to talk privately, we can. But when it comes to the mikvah, there are times when you have to prepare for the mikvah. In such a case, you're allowed to prepare normally for the mikvah as if it wasn't the 9 days. So the same way you would prepare for the mikvah during the year, you could prepare during the 9 days, including bathing, preparing, cleaning, and all of the things that a person would do before they go to the mikvah, you can do during the 9 days. Because it's a necessity and it prepares for a mitzvah. When it's doing something for a mitzvah, like for a bris, like for us finishing the Talmud, like going to the mikvah, you're allowed. A man's going to the mikvah is different. Most men in our community do not have a custom of going to the mikvah other than right before holidays. There are some who choose to go every Friday before Shabbos, and they're nice things to do, and it's certainly it helps put you in the frame of mind, and it's a nice thing to do. It's not a mitzvah, it's a custom, but it's a nice thing. There are some men who go to the mikveh every morning before services, and that helps prepare them for our services. They're allowed to do that under normal circumstances. Now, what happens here is that during the 9 days, for the men's mikveh, they will not heat the water. The water will be lukewarm or room temperature, and then they can use it every day. If a person usually goes to the mikveh every day, they'd be allowed to go every day, because even though it's cold water, you are bathing, so you'd be allowed to go. If you don't go regularly, you're not allowed to go. If you don't go every Friday, you wouldn't be allowed to do it every Friday. If you don't go every Shabbos morning, you would not be able to do it every Shabbos morning. Some people will say, I'll go to the mikveh, there's one in the area. If there's not, there's not. Right? They don't really worry about it. Other people will go out of the way to make sure wherever they are, there's a mikveh. This is talking about for men. Right? For men, since it's only a custom, so they're a bit stricter with the men. It's how they do it. With women, when a woman goes to the mikveh during the 9 days, you would not see a difference really between her going to the mikveh then or another time.
So marital relations are allowed then?
Yes.
During
the 9 days.
But not Tisha B'Av.
Correct. And we'll deal with that next week. Okay. Just want to stress, we've really pretty much got to the end, but just to touch on Erev Tisha B'Av a little bit. Erev Tisha B'Av has a few differences between the rest of the 9 days, since Erev Tisha B'Av really is right before Tisha B'Av starts. So already in the afternoon of Erev Tisha B'Av, we don't learn Torah anymore, which we don't do on Tisha B'Av, and I'll explain that more when we talk about Tisha B'Av. Also, in that afternoon, we do have one important meal. You have a large meal before Tisha B'Av, right? Because you don't want to make yourself sick. So, you're going to be fasting. It'll seem to be longer than almost any other fast day that you've experienced, because it's longer than Yom Kippur in our minds, because it ends so late. Shivas V'Tammuz might seem longer because that ends later than Tisha B'Av, but Tisha B'Av will end quite late, probably in the vicinity of after 9 p.m. And you'll feel it. It's hard. So you should eat well before Tisha B'Av. But there's a mitzvah right before Tisha B'Av to have what's called the Suda HaMafseket, which means the dividing meal. It's the final meal that we have. We do it before Yom Kippur. We do it before, we have such a meal for Yom Kippur. In that case, it's a larger meal. We do it before Tisha B'Av, and a mourner does the same meal, the first meal they have, after coming back from the cemetery. And this meal consists of a piece of bread, a hard-boiled egg, and you eat it by yourself. That is, you can have other people in the room, but you're not sitting at a table eating together, because the result is you don't want to be saying Birkat HaMazon together at the end. This is, remember, we're mourning, and mourners, when they have this meal, eat it by themselves when they come back from the cemetery. After they've eaten this meal, they've fulfilled that mitzvah, they can now go with the other people in the Shiva house. When we are about to begin in Tisha B'Av, we have this meal. It's corresponding that we should realize that we are also mourners over the destructions of the temples, and therefore we eat it in the same manner. You can still sit on a chair, which you can't do in Tisha B'Av, and we'll talk about when we get to Tisha B'Av, but you would eat this similarly to the meal that a mourner eats. The one addition to it is that there's ashes are added to the meal, and ashes does not mean you have to add ashes like that you can actually taste them. It's just a custom that there should be a spot of ash on the food. So the food usually is a piece of bread and a hard-boiled egg. So one might take an ash even from a match and just rub it on the egg so that it has a little of the soot. It's not because you're supposed to eat a lot of ashes. It's supposed to it's sort of like when you go to a fire. If you've ever, God forbid, been in a fire or been near a fire, you can taste the fire after it, like for a long time. It gets into your respiratory system, it gets into your mouth, and you can taste it. You can taste the smoke. If you've lived near places that have a lot of smoke, you taste it for a long time. That taste is something that we should have for a moment, but it's not supposed to be a lot, just a little taste. So you add that onto your egg, together with a piece of bread, and a leg could have water. And following that meal, you're allowed, if you say when you finish that meal that you're still going to eat and drink, you're allowed to have a little bit to eat, and you can drink all you need. But if you didn't say it, following that meal, your fast has begun, even though it could be very early. You're not supposed to eat. So you should, when you have that meal, say, I'm going to have something to eat or drink after. Primarily it's the drinking, so that before Tisha B'Av starts, you can have 3 or 4 glasses of water. It makes a world of difference pragmatically, so that you can fast. Because most of the problems we have from fasting really comes from 2 things. It comes from caffeine withdrawal, and it comes from getting dehydrated. Very few of us really get so hungry that we're sick in one day. That doesn't happen. But quite a few of us are addicted to caffeine, and you'll get caffeine headaches after about 4 hours in the morning. And there's a number of things you can do to fix that. We'll talk about that next week. But that is most of the problem, comes from having addictions to caffeine, or having gives you the withdrawal, or having not enough water in your system and cause you to get dehydrated. Both of them will give you headaches and cause you to have to lay down. But if you hydrate enough and you deal with whatever withdrawals that you may have, you should be able to fast without a problem on Tisha B'Av. And that's really the main part of what we do on Erev Tisha B'Av. So that pretty much brings us right through it. We've now got a basic idea of the 9 days. It is complicated, it can be difficult, and you're welcome to call me anytime with any questions. Before the 3 weeks, you have to know it pretty well, because I won't be here to answer your questions, but as the 3 weeks begin, I will be here for the 3 weeks and for the 9 days. So you can call me anytime, and I'll answer you. If I'm away before then, you can email me. But during that period, you're welcome to if you have any questions about the 9 days, how it works. It is not supposed to put your life in total upheaval. If it is, then you probably didn't understand what we said. It is supposed to affect your life, take away some of the joy, not all of it, some of it, make you conscious of what we're doing, and that's all it's supposed to do. If your life becomes very, very difficult because of the 9 days, either I didn't explain it to you well, or you may have a need personally to not follow some of it, which we would have to discuss. And if you have personal needs, there are some people who have a classification of being unable to do some of these things. If they don't have the physical ability, they don't have the inner strength, so to speak. Not that they don't have discipline, but their body is weak for whatever reason. They can't do some of these things, and the Talmud discusses it. There's people in every generation like that, And if you are, and you find it difficult, you just call me, and we make it work out. But that's basically it, just to have this consciousness. Right? Any other questions? Yes.
Can we use, I suppose we can't use fresh laundry towels, right?
Correct. It'll be the same idea.
Okay. And also,
You can use fresh laundry towels. You can't wash your towels. That's the difference. If you run out of towels, you could wash them. But you could take a towel that was not dirty, and you can use it. Right? But you shouldn't buy new ones, and you shouldn't clean them. Really, it's a problem. The 9 days makes a difficulty in that traditionally, Orthodox homes start their vacations begin the day after Tisha B'Av. That's because the 9 days are over. Now your restrictions on swimming and so forth are over. It's a happy time. We're getting ready for, now we're starting to enter the time before Rosh Hashanah, but you still have 6 weeks.